Close your eyes and step backward through time. The year is 1873. You stand on a dirt street in Deadwood, Dakota Territory, one of the most dangerous settlements ever carved from American soil. The air burns with possibility and gunpowder. Around you, a civilization unlike any before it pulses with violent life. This is not a nation, not yet. This is the frontier, a 1,000-mile gash across the continent where America reinvents itself daily through blood, gold, and audacity. From Texas to Montana, from Kansas to California, wooden towns erupt from nothing within weeks, swelling to populations of 5,000, 10,000 souls, desperate for fortune or escape. Dodge City, Tombstone, Abilene. Their names will echo through history, not for what they built, but for what they destroyed. The sounds hit you first. Hammers against fresh lumber constructing saloons that will stand for perhaps 3 years before collapsing or burning. Piano music drifting from gambling halls where men wager monthly wages on a single card. The rhythmic thunder of cattle drives, herds numbering 30,000 head kicking up dust clouds visible for 20 miles. Longhorns driven north from Texas by men who haven't bathed in 2 months. Gunshots punctuate conversations. Sometimes celebratory, often fatal. In Dodge City during the summer of 1878, there will be more homicides per capita than modern-day Caracas or Cape Town. Smell the air, manure mixing with sagebrush, whiskey and unwashed bodies, wood smoke from cook fires, the metallic tang of blood from the butcher working openly on the street. This is a world built on meat and mineral. Beef cattle transforming Texas grasslands into protein worth $60 a head in northern markets. Silver veins beneath South Dakota hills producing $40 million annually. Gold strikes in Colorado, creating overnight millionaires from former farm boys. Walk these streets and witness the architecture of impermanence. Buildings constructed not to last, but to serve immediate hunger. The saloon larger than the church, always. The brothel more ornate than the schoolhouse. Structures lean at unlikely angles. Signs promise grand hotels that are actually 12 by 12 rooms with canvas walls. Everything feels temporary because it is. These towns exist to extract wealth from earth, labor from bodies, hope from the desperate. Yet observe the contradictions. On one corner, a woman in a silk dress imported from San Francisco, wife of a mine owner, stepping carefully around mud and horse manure. 20 feet away, a Chinese laborer carrying water, paid 1/3 what white workers receive for identical work. Inside the Long Branch saloon, a former Confederate officer drinks beside a Union veteran, both pretending the war ended when it actually festers like an infected wound. Mexicans who owned this land a generation ago now work as ranch hands for newcomers who speak of manifest destiny. The diversity startles you. This is not the homogeneous frontier of legend. African-American cowboys constitute 1 in 4 riders on cattle drives. Irish immigrants fleeing famine construct the railroads. Jewish merchants establish trading posts, all of them gambling that lawlessness offers more freedom than the structured bigotry of eastern cities. But notice what's missing. Government exists only as rumor. The nearest federal marshal might be 200 miles distant. Justice happens in the street, administered by whoever draws fastest. Property rights are established through violence and maintained through fear. A man's life can be worth less than his horse. And beneath everything, a tension builds like pressure in a covered pot. The railroad approaches, steel rails advancing 40 miles each month. Barbed wire patents have been filed. Investors in Chicago and New York examine maps, calculating how to transform chaos into property. The indigenous peoples whose land this was watch from reservations or fight in increasingly desperate conflicts they cannot win. Something magnificent and terrible is happening here. A way of life is being born that will define American mythology for generations. But even in 1873, even in the peak of the boom, you can sense the fragility. This cannot last. This will not last. The question is not whether the Old West will die. The question is how violently it will be killed. By 1876, the cracks become visible to anyone willing to look. What appeared as freedom reveals itself as something more complicated, more dangerous, more unsustainable with each passing month. The violence intensifies beyond reason. In Deadwood alone, during the summer of 1876, an average of one person dies violently every 3 days. Wild Bill Hickok, perhaps the most famous gunfighter in the territory, sits playing poker in the No. 10 saloon on August 2nd. Jack McCall walks behind him and fires a single bullet through his skull. Hickok dies holding aces and eights, a hand that will forever after be called the dead man's hand. The murder is witnessed by a dozen men. McCall walks free after a minor's court declares the killing justified, though nobody can articulate why. 6 months later, a proper territorial court will hang him, but the message has been sent. Law here is whatever men with guns decide it means. The conflict with indigenous peoples reaches a fever pitch of atrocity. The Black Hills, sacred to the Lakota, have been guaranteed to them by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. Then gold is discovered. 15,000 prospectors flood in illegally. The government offers to purchase the land. When the Lakota refuse, the army is sent to force compliance. On June 25, 1876, Lieutenant Colonel George Custer leads the 7th Cavalry into the Valley of the Little Bighorn. Lakota and Cheyenne warriors under Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse annihilate his force, 268 soldiers dead in less than an hour. The nation reels from the shock. Retaliation will be merciless and total. Within 5 years, the Lakota will be confined to reservations, their way of life systematically destroyed. The frontier requires their absence. Meanwhile, the cattle industry begins devouring itself. The open range seemed infinite until everyone arrived simultaneously. By 1880, overstocking becomes catastrophic. Too many cattle competing for too little grass. The land cannot support the numbers. Ranchers begin fencing ranges with the newly invented barbed wire, sparking violent disputes. The Johnson County War in Wyoming will leave dozens dead as large ranchers hire gunmen to eliminate smaller operators and homesteaders they label as rustlers. What began as opportunity calcifies into oligarchy. The boomtowns reveal their true nature as extraction machines. Fortunes flow not to the miners, but to the saloon owners, the freight companies, the land speculators. A prospector might work a claim for 2 years and find nothing. The man who sells him whiskey and supplies becomes wealthy regardless. The woman working in the brothel sees none of the money she generates. Debt peonage traps Chinese workers building railroads. The promise of equality proves as hollow as the promises of gold in every stream. And the railroad advances. You can hear it now even when you cannot see it. The distant whistle, the rhythmic chug of steam engines pulling civilization westward at 20 miles per hour. The transcontinental line was completed in 1869. Now branch lines spread like capillaries, each one carrying Eastern law, Eastern prices, Eastern expectations. The telegraph follows the rails, connecting these isolated towns to a nation that increasingly demands they conform. Watch the old-timers in the saloons. They feel it coming. The mountain men who trapped beaver in the 1840s. The Texas Rangers who fought Comanche. The prospectors who crossed the plains in 1849. They speak of times before civilization, by which they mean before consequences. Their world is measured now in months, not years. The towns themselves show signs of terminal instability. Buildings constructed hastily are collapsing. Fire sweeps through Deadwood in September 1879, destroying 300 structures in hours. These wooden tinderboxes are monuments to short-term thinking. The water supply is contaminated with mining runoff. Cholera and typhoid kill as efficiently as bullets. The cemetery expands faster than the town. You can feel the end approaching. not as catastrophe, but as inevitability. The chaos that made this world possible will be the excuse used to destroy it. Every gunfight, every lynching, every atrocity becomes evidence that the frontier cannot govern itself. And waiting in the east are men with capital and railroads and laws who have been patient enough. They are coming. The Old West is about to discover that it was never free. It was simply waiting to be claimed. The collapse arrives not as a single moment, but as an avalanche that cannot be stopped once it begins. Between 1880 and 1895, everything that defined the Old West is systematically dismantled, burned away, legislated out of existence. The buffalo die first. In 1870, an estimated 30 million American bison roamed the Great Plains, the largest land animal population on Earth. They are the foundation of Plains Indian civilization and the last barrier to total white settlement. So they must be eliminated. Professional hunters armed with long-range rifles begin the slaughter. William F. Cody, Buffalo Bill, kills 280 in 18 months alone. Trains stop so passengers can shoot from windows for sport, leaving carcasses to rot. The hides are shipped east for industrial belts and coats. By 1890, fewer than 1,000 buffalo remain on the entire continent. 30 million to 1,000 in 20 years. The indigenous peoples who depended on them face a choice: starvation or surrender. The reservations swell with defeated nations. The land itself is carved into property. The Homestead Act and railroad land grants transform the open range into a checkerboard of private ownership. Barbed wire, that simple twisted steel, encloses 20 million acres by 1885. The great cattle drives end. Why drive herds 1,000 miles when railroads can transport them in days? The last major drive up the Chisholm Trail occurs in 1884. Cowboys, the iconic figures of Western mythology, become obsolete. Many will end their lives as factory workers or drifters, their skills worthless in the new economy. The towns are tamed through systematic violence against violence itself. Federal marshals arrive with actual authority backed by actual prisons. Wyatt Earp and his brothers kill 3 men at the OK. Corral in Tombstone on October 26, 1881. The gunfight lasts 30 seconds. The legal aftermath lasts months, establishing that even frontier lawmen must answer to courts. Dodge City, the wildest of cattle towns, bans firearms within city limits in 1885. Compliance is enforced at gunpoint by the very men who once embodied lawlessness. Boot Hill Cemetery stops growing. The indigenous resistance ends in massacre and imprisonment. At Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota, on December 29, 1890, the 7th Cavalry surrounds a band of Lakota. A shot rings out. Nobody knows who fired first. The cavalry opens up with Hotchkiss guns, rapid-fire artillery that tears human bodies apart. When the smoke clears, between 250 and 300 Lakota lie dead, 2/3 of them women and children. It is the last major armed conflict between Native Americans and the United States military. The frontier wars are over. The survivors are confined to reservations permanently. In 1890, the U.S. Census Bureau makes an announcement that reverberates through American consciousness: the frontier line. That boundary between civilization and wilderness that has moved steadily westward for 3 centuries no longer exists. The continent is settled. Historian Frederick Jackson Turner will declare this the end of the first period of American history. The frontier, he argues, was what made Americans different from Europeans: individualistic, violent, democratic, restless. Now that the frontier is closed, what will America become? Watch the gunfighters in their final years. Wild Bill Hickok is already dead. Billy the Kid is shot by Pat Garrett in 1881, age 21. Doc Holliday dies of tuberculosis in a Colorado sanitarium in 1887, asking for whiskey. Jesse James is murdered by his own gang member for reward money in 1882. These men who lived by the gun die by the gun or disease, never old age. Their era dies with them. The boomtowns empty or transform. Deadwood's population plummets as the easy gold runs out. Buildings are torn down or left to collapse. The muddy streets are paved. Proper police forces replace vigilante justice. Churches outnumber saloons. What were once wide-open settlements become ordinary American towns, indistinguishable from those in Ohio or Pennsylvania. The Old West doesn't fade away. It is killed deliberately, efficiently, by forces that understood chaos cannot be monetized. What took 30 years to build is destroyed in 15. Silence falls across the West like snow. Where once there was the sound of cattle and gunfire and hammers against wood, now there is the whistle of trains arriving on schedule. The transformation is complete. The wilderness has been defeated. Stand in Dodge City in 1900 and you would not recognize it from 1875. Paved streets, electric streetlights, a proper courthouse, schools teaching children whose parents could barely read. The Boot Hill Cemetery has been relocated to make room for a respectable residential district. The bodies of gunfighters and gamblers moved to unmarked graves. The Long Branch Saloon still stands, but it serves afternoon tea to ladies' groups. This is what progress looks like, the systematic erasure of everything that came before. The psychological impact reverberates through American consciousness for generations. The men who survived the frontier carry trauma that has no name yet. They speak rarely of what they witnessed, the violence, the poverty, the casual brutality. Many drink themselves to death in silent rooms. Their children will romanticize what their fathers tried to forget. By 1910, the first Western films are being produced, transforming horror into entertainment, chaos into mythology. Buffalo Bill Cody, who participated in genocide, now runs a traveling show where actors pretend to be Indians and lose scripted battles every night. Audiences cheer. The indigenous peoples face cultural annihilation. Reservation schools forcibly strip children of their languages, religions, and identities. They are told their parents' ways are savage, that assimilation into white society is mercy. Traditional ceremonies are banned. Sacred lands are open to mining and logging. What the gun began, the schoolhouse completes. It will take a century for America to even begin acknowledging this as the ethnic cleansing it was. Yet something is preserved, though not the way the frontier imagined. The myth of the West becomes America's foundational story. The idea that violence and individualism can build civilization, that law emerges from lawlessness, that progress requires the destruction of what existed before. This narrative will justify American interventions worldwide. It will shape labor relations, gun culture, attitudes toward government. The frontier may be closed, but its ideology is immortal. The land remembers. You can still find the ruts of wagon trails carved so deep they remain visible 150 years later. Ghost towns scatter across Montana and Nevada, their wooden buildings collapsing slowly into earth. In museums, you can see the guns that killed famous men, the badges worn by marshals who were themselves criminals. Tribal nations persist despite every attempt to eliminate them, their cultures wounded but unbroken. Walk through a modern Western city, Denver, Phoenix, Las Vegas, and you are walking on bones. The infrastructure of contemporary America was built on the theft of land and the exploitation of labor that the Old West perfected. The highways follow routes first marked by cattle drives. The water rights were established through violence. The wealth extracted from mines and ranches funded the industries that shaped the 20th century. The Old West died so that America could be born in its current form, a nation that venerates individualism while demanding conformity, that celebrates freedom while imposing control, that mythologizes its violent past while sanitizing it for consumption. What happened between 1865 and 1895 was not an adventure. It was a transformation paid for in blood and land, indigenous genocide and ecological destruction that created the modern American state. The frontier closed, but its ghost still haunts every corner of this country.